Welcome back, AP Gov students. Today is Chapter 15 of Keeping the Republic, titled Media, Power, and Political Communication. If you don't have Keeping the Republic, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I'm going to be going over all the key terms and notes for this chapter that helped me get a 5, so I encourage you to take notes along as well. Narrowcasting, appealing to certain groups of people. Most news stations appeal very obviously to one side of the political aisle in order to retain a consistent audience base. For example, Fox News is pretty obviously a right-wing news source, and CNN or MSNBC is pretty obviously a left-wing news source. This need to retain an audience base basically makes cable news sources biased towards one side. There isn't really any cable news source that's completely objective. Most established news sources that aim to be objective, like, I don't know, NPR maybe, pretty quickly fall out of relevancy and no one really cares about them because people always want to have polarized news because it's the most entertaining and it has the most breaking news stories. News organizations establish news outlets with multiple areas on the internet. These news sources are more powerful because they push out information on multiple platforms and through multiple ways. The news sources that show up the most in your life have the most influence over controlling the narrative. So news outlets with more resources that have access to YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, cable news, all spheres of news information and how news gets spread, they have the most control over the narrative because they can push out the most information. News aggregators, websites that pull together information from multiple news sources, they serve as a great way for people to get unbiased perspectives by being able to look at different news sources more efficiently. There are a few really good websites out there that have great algorithms for sorting different types of news sources and for, rating news sources and for providing different sides of different, topics when you look through their website. There are a few really great objective news sources like this. Gatekeepers, people who control the media. Individual owners and corporate bodies have a lot of influence over what, if, and how information is spread. So the people at the top of certain networks, like the people at the top of, Disney, the people at the top of, I don't really know the large, conglomerate companies that control the media, but those people push their views down through their companies because at the end of the day, they're the owners, so they control the direction that the company takes. So you can imagine that people at the head of Fox are probably pretty conservative and people at the head of CNN are probably pretty left-wing. And these corporate conglomerates and the individuals that sit on the boards of these big companies, they have the most control over the narrative. Commercial bias, reporting the news that brings the most attention. News companies need viewers to bring in the most profit, so they only want to report news they know will get the most attention. Oftentimes, this results in the news only covering, one really hot issue for the longest time, and a lot of other issues don't get any attention. Or they tend to cover issues that get a lot of, interest, but they're not actually really important to, the country or politics. But because news outlets rely on clicks and views for their money, they have the incentive to report on things that don't always actually mean the most importance to, political life or social life. Clickbait, fake information that attracts the audience. News outlets have an incentive to fake, dramatize, or exaggerate headlines to get people to consume their news. Clickbait is often a term used in the YouTube sense when people talk about thumbnails and titles, but it's definitely a real thing when it comes to news sources and news outlets. A lot of news outlets will put misleading headlines on their articles, or they'll put misleading pictures at the top of their website homepage or something to get people to click on articles. This has a negative effect on people who are consuming the news because if you don't actually click on the article and you just read the headline, you could get easily misinformed, and there are a lot of people that scroll through news sources that just read headlines. Pundits, most popular reporters. These people are looked to by the most people for news stories. They have immense control over the media narrative. The famous talking heads, as you might hear them called, they have that influence over people because people trust them for their news sources because they're famous people. And they have a lot of control over what gets spread out because if they're the most popular people putting out the news, they're putting out the news for the most amount of people. So for example, you have someone like Tucker Carlson, although he no longer works for Fox, and then maybe someone on MSNBC, I'm trying to think Rachel Maddow maybe, or Anderson Cooper, people that are really popular in political life and in the news. These people have a lot of control over what news is spread. Agenda setting, the media establishes which issues are important. Depending on what news stories media outlets give their time to, some issues become more notable and important than others. So if news sources are constantly covering one specific issue or they're putting a lot of attention towards one issue, naturally the people watching the news will put importance on that issue too. That's why a lot of liberal news outlets will put more time to stories that benefit their side, or more conservative news outlets will put more time to stories that benefit their side, because if they keep pushing a specific story, the people who watch the news will think that story is really important. Framing affecting the appearance of a story or issue. News outlets can give a story a specific spin in order to get people to believe a certain way about a story from the beginning. This kind of ties back to clickbait, although framing is almost more in like what people actually are saying on the TV, like when you watch breaking news or something like that. If you initially cover a story with a specific spin on the day that it breaks, it's pretty hard for people to break that narrative as the story keeps unfolding. The original narrative is really strong and oftentimes holds place throughout an entire, story's lifeline. Horse race journalism, story breaking is more important than credibility. Since news outlets make money based on views and clicks, they always want to be the first to break a major story regardless of the facts and credibility. The news outlet that breaks the story first will get the most clicks when the story breaks, and they'll get cited as a source when the story keeps, unfolding, and that brings the most attention to their news site. But this can oftentimes make news outlets want to rush to put the story out on their website or on the TV before all the facts come out. When I think of horse race journalism, I think of TMZ. They're always rushing to get a lot of these stories out. They seem to be always the first news outlet to get on, really popular and notable stories. Even though they are actually pretty good and a lot of the stuff that they break is true, there are some times where TMZ has to walk stuff back because they're so quick to put out stuff that they find that sometimes they have to walk it back because it's just not credible, and the things they put out end up being untrue. Optics, how something initially looks or feels. Oftentimes, the feeling that a certain situation or story gives off is more important than the facts behind it. Optics are a huge thing. When I think of optics, I think specifically of someone like Joe Biden. When Joe Biden spoke or was on the TV, he wasn't always the most best looking, best appearing. The way he would sound when he talked wasn't always the best. So a lot of people would end up ignoring what he actually said or the facts behind what he's actually talking about and just basically say, oh my god, look how bad he is up on the stage. Whatever he's saying must also be bad. And this can also be the same way with someone like Trump. Trump comes off as really rough and really angry sometimes, and a lot of people will ignore what he's actually saying just because the optics of him just being up on that stage and talking a lot of the time is really bad. And that's why optics are really important. Sound bites, clips of people talking. Small quotes can be heavily manipulated by the news media. They are often scrutinized by media outlets more than specific facts. A lot of times when you watch cable news shows, most of the stuff they put on the screen are just quotes, and most of the videos they play are just little sound bites of politicians. Not a lot of what they actually report on is real facts, real on-the-ground stuff, and that's why sound bites play a large role in the news and why they're often spun and swayed to certain ways. Feeding frenzies, issues that attract a lot of attention. These stories can become overblown and overcovered, hurting the credibility of the story and blinding people from more important issues. Sometimes issues that are overcovered are actually really important, but a lot of times there'll be issues that just have a lot of drama around them or have a lot of nosiness and attention around them, but they aren't actually that important, and these become huge stories for media outlets to cover. However, if a feeding frenzy just continues for the longest time, stories that really matter can just get ignored. Selective perception, only watching what one agrees with. Most people practice selective perception, leading to people establishing media echo chambers around themselves, not taking in a wide variety of viewpoints. It's just a fact that most people who watch CNN are left-wing and most people that watch Fox are right-wing. People tend to want to hear what they want to hear, you know what I mean? So people will watch what they agree with because they always want to have their own side vindicated rather than have their side challenged. Think about it, when you're watching news late at night on your couch, you don't really want to watch something that's going to challenge you. You just want to watch something that's just going to, just something have in the background, but something that will always agree with you. That's why, from what I said earlier, news aggregators are so important because they actually make people get their views challenged when they read the news. Because if you go on sites like those, you always have differing sides. Permanent campaign, politicians always exhibit campaign behavior. In order to appeal to the media, politicians are always doing typical campaign behaviors, even when not in an election cycle. So if you think about how the news operates, the news, when it comes to more popular and notable politicians, they're always scrutinizing them, they're always attacking them, they're always analyzing them. A part of a politician's everyday life is refuting bad claims made about them and always arguing for their side and why they are a good person to be in office. And even though they aren't technically campaigning when they say that stuff, they basically are. There are like campaign behaviors. So because the media is so nosy almost, and they're always attacking and looking for weaknesses in politicians are almost always arguing for them, and they're almost always campaigning, even when they're not in an election cycle. News management, influencing, and spinning the media to one side. A politician and their staff do a lot of work to make sure news outlets are being favorable to them. A politician's staff is always doing PR stuff, and they're always trying to manage the media, and they're always doing damage control when a politician messes up. A huge part of a politician's staff is making sure their image stays favorable, and this has a lot to do with how the media covers them. Trial balloon, leak stories that show how the public will react to certain issues. Some politicians or people in government will intentionally leak information. The reason I'm using the quotes is because leak is fake. They just intentionally do it in order to see how the public will react to a certain action. What I remember the most when it comes to trial balloon is the Roe v. Wade case. There was a leak that came out that spread the court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade well before they actually decided on the case and it went public. And it came out pretty soon after that it was most likely that this leak was intentionally done by someone in the office just to get an assessment of the public's reaction to the overturning of the case before the court actually did it. Political accountability, politicians taking responsibility for their actions. Because a lot of the media is about storytelling, politicians spend more time attacking media outlets and how they cover stories rather than taking responsibility for the events actually being reported. When I think of this, I think of someone like Trump. Trump constantly accuses the news of being fake and accuses certain reporters of having a bad agenda towards him. And this is just an example of the declining political accountability because of the expanding news. Because the news has so much power over how people view politicians, politicians will spend a lot of time attacking the news and how they're covering them rather than what they're actually saying and refuting the facts that they're actually reporting. Citizen journalism, people conduct independent news every day. In the modern age, citizen journalism is incredibly empowered due to the popularization of social media sites and the internet as a whole. This kind of whole started with Drudge Report, I guess, when the internet first started, where it was just a guy reporting news on a website. And now with sites like Twitter and Instagram, people are entitled to spread videos and facts and things that they discovered, whenever they want. They don't have to be part of like a cable news network to spread the news. They can just tweet it out and people know, and it can become a story. And that is actually an incredibly good thing because it expands the right to free speech and free press. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter, and goodbye. Yo, if you're super cool and awesome, you should follow my Twitter or X if you're that kind of person. It's at Clark4724. I post a lot of random stuff on there, but I also post channel updates and when my next videos are coming out. So if you're gonna keep watching my channel, then I recommend you follow, and thanks.